So welcome to our neurodiversity and parenting clinic. This is a new one for me, and I'm really excited to deliver this. It's a new one in order that I could deliver the topic to you, but actually it's a lived experience for me, and it's something that I've been dealing with not only through my teaching career, but also as a parent as well, and through my professional work that I do with families. So I think my takeaway for this today is that every family is different. Some of you are here because you've already got a diagnosis of neurodiversity for your family. Some of you are here because you're just curious. Some of you are here because your kids might actually not be accessing the school system at the moment because of what is going on for them and their anxiety or their neurodiversity. We've got other people who are in the system waiting for a diagnosis. And we've got others of you who are just walking on eggshells and not quite sure which direction your child or yourself is going to go in as the day progresses. So a mixed bag. And I'm going to be honest with you, the way that neurodiversity is diagnosed these days, I really support. But it's no longer on a spectrum whether you're either really neurodiverse or just a little bit neurodiverse. It's more of a spider web. And I love this because actually what it is it's saying that each person is an individual and each person's brain and style of learning is accessed in a different way. And I think that's a really beautiful thing. But when you do a talk like this, where you're trying to fill up people's toolkits and help them along the road to parent their children who do view the world differently, that can be a challenge. So I hope I'm going to do it justice. I hope I'm going to add something to your toolkit. And that's what it's about, adding something to your toolkit that you can take away and you can use or you can try with your child following on from this. At the end of the call, I will ask you to share one thing, just one thing that you've resonated with you or that you want to take away with you today or you want to try out. So do think about that as we're going through. I think when it comes to working with families, I have three pillars that I work with, whether I'm working with you individually, whether I'm working with your child, whether I'm giving a talk like this. And it all comes down to curiosity. So we lead with curiosity. There's a wonderful Walt Whitman quote, which is be curious rather than judgmental. And I think quite often as families, especially with dealing with our children who are not navigating in the world in the same way that the child next to them is, we can be quite judgmental upon ourselves, but also on our child. So I really encourage the people and the clients that I work with to lead with curiosity. The other one is about connection. So how can we connect with our child before we need to correct them? How can we connect with them before they reach that spiral of dysregulation? And then the third one is communication. And I think this is a big one for families who are parenting children who are autistic, ADHD, who are PDA, who potentially have dyslexia or dyspraxia, all those kind of things, highly sensitive. Communication. And we absolutely do need to look at how we communicate non-verbally and verbally with our loved ones. Okay, so what does neurodiversity actually mean? And I don't want to give us a clinical explanation because you can get that by doing a good Google search. I think for me, it's about lived experience and it's about what are you navigating on a daily basis? What is your gut telling you about your child that perhaps is not making sense in the context of what you've read in a parenting book or where you've Googled at 2 a.m. or how you've, consulted ChatGPT? What does it look like for you on a daily basis? And what I would say is that these children, they navigate life on a higher volume. And I love that analogy because some of our children are really sensitive to noise. Others are sensitive to overwhelm. Other ones are sensitive to touch and how things feel on their bodies. Other ones are sensitive to changes in plans. Other children have a higher volume or less tolerance perhaps when it comes to social interactions, or perhaps they don't know the rules of social interactions. But I think for all of them, they are navigating life at a higher volume. And that goes in true because, in fact, no, I'm going to talk about that later. So strategies that might work for other children are potentially not going to work for your children. Or you might have tried something and thinking that just didn't land the way I thought it was going to, or the way the book said it was going to, or the way Anisa said it might have gone to when I was listening to her in her talk. And that's okay. I also want to let you know that I am coming to this from firsthand experience. So for those who don't know me, my name is Anisa Lewis. I'm a positive parenting coach. My background is teaching and education. And before I'm doing what I'm doing now, which I've nearly been doing for 10 years, can you believe that? 10 years of doing what I'm doing. I was a deputy head of operations for quite an exclusive private school down in Surrey before I relocated my family up north. And I think the other thing that's important for you to know is that I am a mum. My daughter, my lovely daughter, is currently sitting A levels, first exam on Wednesday. She was diagnosed with autism when she was 15. And basically, we missed all of the cues that she gave us that she found life tough, and that she found that she was her place in the world was a bit different. And so, and I sort of, I feel constant guilt for that because this is what I do for a living. I'm a teacher. I spot signs. I look for patterns. I do all of that. And in my own child, it wasn't until she hit puberty and things just went very, very pear-shaped that I went, something's not quite right here. And not quite right in the fact that there's something wrong with her. Absolutely not. She's a gorgeous, amazing human being, but she found life difficult to navigate. And so she came out as autistic. She also has a dyslexic diagnosis, and we are under CAMHS for food and eating disorders. So there is a lot going on at home, which I can absolutely and completely, I can relate to what many, many parents are going through. And I think we missed it for so long because we scaffolded her life and we set her life up for success. So actually it wasn't until she hit secondary school where things were like, okay, actually now the hormones have hit, I can't keep it all inside again. I can't mask anymore. And it's all unraveling. And so that's how we came through the diagnosis process, which that was a question that someone had. Likewise, I should have said, if you do have any questions, please just pop them into the chat box. If I don't get a chance to answer them today, I will go back through the chat and I will see if I can create a newsletter on that, or I can create another video for you on one of my channels that feeds the answer to that question if I am not able to, or I don't cover what you are wanting to have some output on today. Okay, so as I sort of hinted at before, our neurodiverse children experience the world with more intensity. Their nervous systems are on high alert. They are constantly scanning for danger. So they are working from their primitive brain a good chunk of the time. So your primitive brain is there for your fight, flight, or freeze response. There's also one called fawn, which I have to say I'm not up to speed completely on what that is, but there is a fourth F in there. And it's really their bodies, so all of their senses are heightened. We've talked about them living life on a higher volume, but that is because the neurons and the sensitives and the DNA inside them is scanning for danger. And they quite often will think, oh, school is dangerous, or the loud corridor doesn't work for me, or whatever it is. And their body, instead of having, I'm going to call it rational, but I don't really mean it. I can't think of the appropriate word. But instead of their bodies going, okay, well, that's okay. We'll just take a deep breath. We're going to walk through this busy corridor. We're going to get to somewhere quiet. Their body goes into danger, danger. Saber-toothed tiger is coming to attack me. What can I do about this? And so they really are responding in a hyper-aware way to the input that they're giving. And what I think about is that all of the communication we're getting from our children, whether they are neurodivergent or not, I should add, is communication. But when your neurodivergent child is melting down, they shut down, they explode, or they might refuse to do something or refuse to speak, that is our communication. They are working really hard. In fact, they're working triply hard than an atypical child to navigate their world. And so we need to sort of then peel back some of the layers to understand what that communication is trying to tell us. And so I guess what I want us to do from that is to take away, to reframe our thoughts around the behaviors that our children are showing us. Okay, it's communication. What can I do with this piece of information? How can I adjust my sails of my ship? How can I support my child in a slightly different way in order that we can navigate this bump in the road? Again, part of the questions that came in from parents was, what do I do if my child just shuts down and doesn't like to talk about their emotions and feelings? And I would say that if your child did have their their cobweb or their spider's web profile. It might be that actually their spider's web show that they are really developed in maybe the intelligence side of things, the intellect, the knowledge, all of that kind, but actually maybe they lack some of those social cues, the words, the language around communication that helps us to talk about things. And I do have some tips that are going to help with this. I think we also talked about, not we, in your questionnaire, defiance and explosiveness, and that is very much an overwhelm and a primitive brain response. The other thing that came up with was, my child is absolutely fine at school. They are 100% okay. And then they come home from school and they melt down. And that is because that's a prime example of masking. You know, they put on their airs and graces at school because they are trying to fit in. They're trying to be normal. They are watching the world. They're scanning the world, and they're doing everything they can so that they don't stick out. They come home to you. You are their safe space. So actually it's a compliment to you and your parenting if you have major meltdowns at the end of the day. It may not feel like that, but it is a compliment to you that you have created that safe space where they can be themselves. Now, there is a wonderful website here in the UK, which is the Autistic Girls Network. I would say it's just as relevant for boys as it is for girls, but there has been a lot more research done into boys' side of neurodiversity than perhaps there has been girls. So I'm going to signpost you to the Autistic Girls Network. About halfway down the page is something they've called a white paper. They have commissioned some research into girls and masking, and it's a really interesting read. It's a very easy read. I would say it's a booklet rather than a research paper, so because I don't want to put you off what it is, but actually it's got some really good points in there, and it's got some nice checklists if you're a person who just sort of wants to have a bit of a feel for things. So yeah, I'm going to signpost you in that direction. What I'll also do is if I remember, try and put that link into the email that I send out afterwards, so you can just click on it and have a look. Okay, so I guess what you're really here for is, what can we do to support our children, whether they have got the diagnosis, whether you're waiting for the diagnosis, or whether you are just curious about what is going on for your child and how they are navigating the world. What I would say is, when we are looking at our neurodivergent children, it's how can we set them up for success? And that perhaps is going to be looking at how we do things differently to other members of your family, to the Joneses down the road, to whomever. Actually, it's about what is right for my family. What do my family need? What do my children need in order for them to be the most successful version of themselves that they can be? I would also say, with many neurodivergent families, low pressure is the way forward. You know, how can we take some of the pressure off? How can we, they do need boundaries. Absolutely. They do need some consequences. They do need nurturing. They need all of those things. But how can we reduce the pressure somewhat on them so that we're not having lots of refusal from them or shut down from them because they're in complete overwhelm mode? The other thing I think we need to lead on with our neurodivergent children or our highly sensitive children is flexibility. What works today might not work tomorrow. It might not even work in the next 5 minutes. So how can we show flexibility towards our families? Now, this is a tough order for a parent because actually you're also navigating life. It might also be that you are neurodivergent yourself. And that's an interesting journey. Once your child is diagnosed as neurodivergent, both my husband and I went, it was because of you. And then you dig a bit deeper and you think, okay, actually, I'm very good at masking as well. So there is a lot of stuff that then comes up for you as a parent as a result of having a highly sensitive neurodivergent child, where you sort of, I know from my generation, it just wasn't, the education wasn't there. You were just versed as naughty or different, or in my case, I was the good girl. I was the one that just didn't want to stick out for any other reason at all. And I think education has come so far, and that is to the benefit of ourselves, but also for our children. Okay, so I like to lead with regulation before expectation. And what I mean by that is, how can we connect with our children first? How can we maybe introduce co-regulation so that before we actually have the conversation or the lecture or the shouting match or the whatever it is, how can we lead with keeping them regulated before we have to correct them or before we connect with them. And that is going to look very different for every family. I do have some ideas at the end of what we can do, but I'm sort of just setting a bit of a scene. The other one is scaffolding. So especially our neurodivergent children struggle sometimes with transitions, maybe mornings, maybe it's the end of the day when they're winding down and getting things out of their head, going to bed. Practical things like visual timetables might work here. Timers are quite good, so they can literally see the passing of time. Don't set it up on your watch and have a countdown of numbers. They need to see the passing of time. If you are leading them into you've got 5 minutes before we have to leave the house, show them what 5 minutes looks like, although this is only 1 minute. It's actually interesting. I own quite a number of timers, and they don't always match the time on the top. That's my neurodivergence. I've actually sat there and timed them. But anyway, your children don't need to know that. It's just the visual seeing of time moving, which I think is really, really important. Advance warning that something's going to happen, that something's going to change. Now this is going to be a bit counterintuitive, and hear me out basically. So how can we reduce demand while increasing connection? And as I said, it's a bit counterintuitive, because what happens is when things get really hard, when the meltdown is happening, when the child is overwhelmed, we go in potentially harder with the rules. And actually what that does is your child then unravels before your eyes, and it's not always what we need. And I say, that's why one of my pillars in the work that I do is connection, because we always lead with connection. Do they need a hug? Do they just need some time out? Do they need you to go and do something else before you come back to that? Again, not always practical when you're just trying to get them out the door or to another activity or something like that. But how can we, again, connect without increasing the demand, without bringing the rules in, without making the boundaries smaller? Someone mentioned in their questionnaires about children who just shut down and won't talk. A nice one for this is very much side-by-side activities. There is something about when you're sort of on a face-off, like an interview, it feels very intense. Whereas if you can introduce some side-by-side activities, it might be walking, it might be drawing, it might be doing some cooking together. It might just be when you sit at the dining room table for dinner, you actually sit in a line rather than facing off against each other, so that actually communication flows, or they don't feel the intensity of that moment. And therefore, perhaps, I'm not saying it's always going to work, but perhaps they then feel more calm in order to be able to then communicate, to talk, to give one-word answers, whatever it is. I thought what I would do now is actually talk from lived experience. Not that the other stuff that I mentioned wasn't lived experience, but from what has worked within my household and within the families of the kids that I work with. So at the end of the day, I would say about 80% of the families that I end up working with, it's about supporting families with neurodivergent children or neurodivergence in themselves. Whether you know it now or not, we sort of formulate that together. So lots of things I'm going to talk about now have come through very much lived experience. I love movement for neurodiverse children, whether that is simply getting them on a trampoline, whether that is just getting them out in the morning to burn off all the energy that has been stored up overnight. I'm a big fan of wobble cushions. Wonderful wobble cushion that this is, because when they sit on it or stand on it, I quite often get kids to stand on it and talk to me at the same time, because their core has to be put into action and they're constantly having to move, but it's within sort of a more controlled environment. They love sitting on this as well. And I know some children have wedges that they sit on too, but that one's quite a nice one. Movement is always good, whether for us as adults or whether for our kids. If all goes pear-shaped, get them moving. That could also be just running up and down stairs if your child is safe to do such a thing. Whatever works, get their bodies moving, because what that also does is change the energy state within them. And it can also shift moods, it can shift emotions. So movement is a big one. The other one I love is water. Now, it might not be appropriate for me to dunk my 17-year-old in the bath. However, if you can get them washing their hands and getting colder water on their wrists, if you can get them in the bath, water play if your child is a bit younger, or a shower, that is also another really lovely reset support for your child. I think with our children, we have to run our lives a bit differently, and that might even be creating spaces, whether that's within a school environment where they can have quiet spaces, which is not so overly stimulating, or whether they can just retreat to a safe space, possibly their bedroom. We need to think about the spaces in your home. Are they overstimulating in the fact that you always have the overhead lights on, or could you have lamps on? Are they overstimulating because you always have music on and actually your child needs quiet? I don't know. This is where you're going to have to read it for your family and what your child needs. But look at your spaces. Are your spaces causing your child to give you a shutdown mode? I don't know. Be curious is what I'm asking you. I love fidgets. I know schools quite often, I've got a box of fidgets here of different types and different ones. The ones that are quite popular with the kids that I work with are these stretchy ones where they literally can just do anything with, or the squeezy ones. Some children like these, which is like the puzzle pieces that they just put together. But actually what I find is schools quite often will ban them because they're not used correctly, which is such a shame for the children who do actually need them and will help them in the process of concentrating. I think another thing that schools sometimes do, which is another one that you might want to replicate at dinner tables and stuff, is they put around the legs of chairs the resistance bands that you do in exercise, so that they can play with that, they can fiddle with it, they've got something to put their body against while you're trying to get them to sit and eat at the same time, because I know that sitting and eating can often be something that neurodiverse parents grapple with their children. This one I think is really, really important. And when we get sort of sucked into the nuts and bolts of parenting these children who do view the world differently, we sometimes forget to celebrate the effort that goes into their day. It's not about outcomes. For these children, it is the fact that actually, you know what, they stepped outside today, and that's a big deal when they're actually more housebound and they like being at home and that's their safe place. It's about praising process rather than the end result of where you get them to. So actually use praise, use it, I was going to say, in abundance. But some of our neurodiverse children do not like praise, and they do not like hearing nice things about themselves. So sometimes with that, you have to do it a bit backhanded by letting them overhear you say something to someone else, or just having a muttering conversation to yourself about how pleased you are about something, something, something. But I love naming, I call them virtues, value words, you know, the courage, the bravery, the perseverance, all those kind of things that support our children understanding themselves a little bit more. Now I'm rushing towards the finish line here and I still have more things to say, so I'm going to move on. I think there are lots of things that we can do to help our children, and if you want to book in for a free 20-minute chat with me, you are most welcome, and we can look at your family in more detail. Some of you asked about the process of when you've got that gut feeling your child is not on the pathway to diagnosis yet. How do you know? And I think this is where you really need to trust your gut as a parent, and you need to trust that actually you are your child's biggest advocate and you know your child better than anybody else. And so this is where you have to just trust the process and go, actually, I need to speak to the GP. I need to speak to my child's school. I need to go into the nursery and start these processes off. Because here in the UK, even if you pay privately to go and have an assessment, you're looking at a minimum of probably 4 months for private assessments. And if you want to go down the NHS route, you're looking at 18 months, if not 2 or 3 years to get your child assessed. So all I would say to you is, if you feel that you are leaning in that direction, it is better to get your child on a waiting list somewhere. You can always change your mind. Now, I'm not about labeling children for labeling's sake. I think your child is a wonderful human being, however they are, absolutely and completely. However, we live in a society that needs a piece of paper to give your children some other access to support that is out there. And therefore, it's not about the label, it's about what they can access with that piece of paper that helps them along the way. So that's all I'm going to say about that one. If anyone wants to ask me more questions on that, please get in contact. Okay, so that's a good point. If you look at the chat box now, Judith's very kindly just put something in there that I think is quite relevant about how, depending on the age of the child, there are things that the school can do to support your child within the provision and other bits and pieces. So, okay, so I think I would be remiss, I think is probably the word, if I didn't mention you, the parent, the carer in all of this, because you are carrying a lot. I know some days I am absolutely exhausted, and it's just because my mental load is carrying so much, and I want my child to survive, and I know she's going through a tough time and all the rest of it. And so you can feel alone, you can feel to blame, you can't see the wood for the trees because there's so much going on. You feel guilt, you can feel confusion, you can feel grief. And I think what I picked up from the questionnaires is an overlay sense of loneliness. Sometimes you are not alone. You need, if you need help, there is help out there, and I am willing to give it. I know, Judith works in a school. That's her primary role, is what she does, is support parents through this. There will be parents, there will be people in your school, family liaison officers, all those kind of people who are there to help. I will say, for the English school system, they are drowning a little bit. And so sometimes we do need to seek help elsewhere in order to get it. But you're not okay. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay not to have all the answers. And it's okay to be curious about your child and how they are navigating the world.